In a house filled with secrets and betrayal, young Caleb uncovers a chilling plan that threatens to destroy his family. With his father's trust on the line and time running out, Caleb must find the courage to expose the truth before it's too late. Can he stop the scheme and rebuild his fractured life, or will the darkness tear them apart forever? Caleb stood still, his eyes glued to the freshly turned earth that now covered his grandfather's grave. The cemetery was quiet, except for the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. At just 12 years old, Caleb felt the weight of loss settle heavily on his small shoulders. William, his grandfather, had been more than just family. He had been a mentor, a father figure, the one who taught Caleb how to paint and see the world through colors. Now, without him, the world seemed duller, less vivid. As he stared at the grave, memories of the atelier filled his mind. That small, cluttered space where William spent hours teaching him how to mix paints, how to let his imagination flow onto the canvas. Caleb's heart ached as he realized that those moments were now just memories, locked in the past. He wondered how he would cope without the comforting presence of his grandfather, who always seemed to know the right thing to say or do. The emptiness was overwhelming, a void he didn't know how to fill. Moving to his father's house wasn't going to make things easier. Thomas, his father, had always been a distant figure, more like a stranger than a parent. Caleb knew their relationship would be different, especially now that he would be living with Thomas and his stepmother, Donna. The house, already unfamiliar, would feel even colder without the warmth of William's guidance. Caleb wasn't sure how he would fit into this new life, and the uncertainty gnawed at him as he stood at the grave, feeling more alone than ever. The car ride back from the funeral was silent, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Caleb sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, lost in his thoughts. Thomas, gripping the steering wheel tightly, glanced at his son and finally broke the silence. "I know I haven't been around much, Caleb," Thomas began, his voice hesitant. "But sometimes life pulls us in directions we don't expect. I hope we can find a way to fix things between us." Caleb didn't respond, his gaze still fixed on the passing scenery. The words felt empty, like trying to mend something that had never truly existed. Thomas's attempt at connection left Caleb feeling more distant. He couldn't shake the feeling that his father's words were just that, words. A hollow promise of something he wasn't sure could be repaired. The thought of trusting Thomas, of building a relationship with a man who had been absent for so long, felt impossible. Caleb wasn't ready to confront that reality. He simply nodded, more out of politeness than agreement, and continued to watch the world blur by, wondering if this new life would ever feel like home. Moving into Thomas and Donna's house marked the beginning of a new chapter for Caleb, but it wasn't the fresh start he had hoped for. From the outside, the house looked welcoming, with its neat lawn and charming facade. But inside, things quickly changed. Donna, who initially greeted Caleb with warm smiles, gradually became colder. At first, she gave him small tasks to help around the house, things that seemed reasonable enough. But as the days passed, those tasks grew into constant demands, and Caleb found himself shouldering more responsibility than any 12-year-old should. Thomas, always away on long trucking routes, had no idea what was happening. Caleb was left under Donna's control, and she didn't hesitate to take advantage of it. She treated him more like an employee than a stepson, expecting him to keep the house spotless, while Evan, her son from a previous marriage, was free to do whatever he pleased. Caleb would catch glimpses of Evan playing outside or watching TV, while he scrubbed floors or washed dishes. The unfairness of it all gnawed at him, but there was no one to turn to. Donna's attitude towards Caleb was anything but nurturing. She rarely spoke to him unless it was to point out something he had done wrong or give him another chore. "Make sure you vacuum the living room before you go to bed," she'd say, her voice sharp and authoritative. Evan, in contrast, received nothing but kindness from her. He'd sit at the dinner table, laughing with Donna while Caleb stood in the kitchen, finishing up whatever task she had left him with. Caleb started to realize that no matter how hard he worked, he would never be treated like family. It didn't take long for Caleb to feel the full weight of Donna's harshness. On weekends, when other kids were out playing, Caleb was inside cleaning or running errands for Donna. She gave him little room to breathe, and when Thomas was home, her behavior softened just enough to keep her cruelty hidden. Caleb began to dread the sound of her voice, knowing it meant more work and less freedom. He had lost his grandfather, and now it felt like he was losing himself, too, trapped in a place where he wasn't wanted. Despite everything, Caleb tried to keep the peace. He didn't want to cause problems, especially with Thomas being gone so often. But every day it got harder to ignore the injustice of his situation. The contrast between how Donna treated him and how she treated Evan was glaring, and Caleb couldn't help but feel like an outsider in his own home. The weight of responsibility and isolation was becoming too much to bear, and Caleb wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on without breaking. Caleb's frustration grew with each passing day, and the thought of telling Thomas about Donna's behavior began to weigh heavily on his mind. Every time Thomas came home, Donna would suddenly become warm and attentive, acting as though she had Caleb's best interests at heart. She would smile at him, ask how his day was, and for a moment, Caleb would wonder if maybe he had imagined it all. But once Thomas left again, the coldness returned, and so did the endless tasks. Caleb found himself trapped in a cycle of doubt, unsure of what to believe. Late at night, Caleb would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction in his head. Should he tell Thomas? What if his father didn't believe him? The fear of making things worse held Caleb back. Donna had a way of making everything seem normal when Thomas was around, and Caleb feared that Thomas would side with her, dismissing his complaints as childish whining. After all, Thomas had known Donna longer, and Caleb had only just come into their lives. The risk of upsetting the fragile balance terrified him. Yet, the mistreatment continued, and Caleb felt increasingly cornered. Every day, he faced new challenges, whether it was handling more chores than he could manage or enduring Donna's biting remarks. He could feel his patience wearing thin, and the idea of speaking up became more appealing, but also more terrifying. What if telling Thomas didn't change anything? What if it only made Donna angrier and more determined to make his life miserable? The uncertainty gnawed at him, leaving him feeling powerless. Even with his fears, Caleb found solace in the one thing his grandfather had taught him: painting. He spent hours in his room, escaping into the world of colors and canvases. The act of creating something from nothing brought him a peace that nothing else could. But even painting couldn't erase the doubts. Caleb knew he couldn't stay silent forever. The tension in the house was growing, and with each passing day, the stakes felt higher. He needed to do something, but the fear of what might happen next kept holding him back. Despite his hesitation, the pressure was building. Caleb could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew he couldn't go on living like this, constantly in fear of Donna's next demand, constantly questioning whether or not to tell Thomas. As much as he wanted to avoid conflict, something had to give. Caleb just didn't know when, or how, he would find the courage to speak up. The breaking point came one evening when Caleb could no longer keep his frustrations bottled up. Thomas had just returned from a long trip, and the house was calm for the moment. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, staring at his father, who was busy unpacking his bags. The weight of everything that had been happening pressed down on him, and he knew this was the time. "Dad," Caleb began, his voice shaky, "I need to talk to you. It's about Donna." Thomas looked up, surprised by the seriousness in his son's voice. Caleb took a deep breath and told his father everything, about the chores, the harsh words, and how Donna treated him differently when Thomas wasn't around. He explained how Evan was never expected to do anything, while he was treated like a servant. Thomas listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Caleb's heart raced as he spoke, unsure of how his father would react. He had rehearsed this conversation in his head so many times, but now that it was happening, he wasn't sure if it would make any difference. When Caleb finished, there was a long pause. Thomas rubbed his temples and sighed deeply. "I had no idea it was this bad," he finally said, looking at Caleb with a mix of guilt and frustration. "I should have been paying more attention." Caleb could see the conflict in his father's eyes. Thomas was torn between believing his son and the woman he had married. "I'll handle this," Thomas said at last. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." But Caleb wasn't entirely convinced. He had heard promises before, and things never seemed to change. Before his next trip, Thomas made a decision. He installed a hidden camera in the house, tucked away in a corner where Donna wouldn't notice. "This way, I'll know for sure what's going on," Thomas told Caleb. Caleb wasn't sure how to feel about it, relieved that his father was taking action, but also nervous about what the camera might reveal. It was strange to think of his life being recorded, but if it was the only way to show Thomas the truth, then it was worth it. As Thomas left for his next trip, Caleb felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. He knew Donna would soon return to her old ways, and the camera would capture everything. But there was still a part of him that worried. What if it wasn't enough? What if Thomas saw the footage and still didn't understand the full impact of Donna's behavior? Caleb knew that this was just the beginning, and the outcome of this plan could change everything. With Thomas gone on his next trip, the house quickly fell back into its old routine. Donna wasted no time in asserting her control over Caleb, piling on more chores than usual. "Make sure you scrub the bathroom floors today, Caleb," she ordered one morning as she sipped her coffee, barely glancing at him. Caleb, with no choice, nodded and got to work. Evan, as usual, sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone and ignoring everything around him. The stark difference in how Donna treated the two boys couldn't have been clearer. As Caleb cleaned, Donna made it a point to criticize his every move. "You missed a spot," she'd say coldly, or "Don't forget to mop under the sink." No matter how hard he tried, it was never enough. Caleb learned to keep his head down and push through the work, knowing that any protest would only make things worse. Evan, meanwhile, continued to live a carefree life, lounging on the couch, playing video games, and enjoying Donna's unyielding attention. The unfairness burned in Caleb, but there was nothing he could do. The most painful moments came during meals. While Caleb worked in the kitchen, preparing the food and setting the table, Evan and Donna would sit together, talking and laughing as if Caleb didn't even exist. Donna never invited Caleb to join them until after everything was done. "You can eat once you finish cleaning up," she'd say dismissively. Caleb would sit alone at the table, picking at his food long after they had left, the emptiness of the house and their indifference surrounding him. Donna's mistreatment wasn't always loud or obvious, it was in the small, cutting remarks, the way she overlooked him, and the constant work she piled on him. It was the way she made him feel like he was a burden, an outsider in his own home. Caleb found himself wishing more and more that he could escape back to the days with his grandfather, where he was loved and valued. But those days were gone, and all that remained was the cold reality of life with Donna and Evan. Despite the weight of everything, Caleb held on to one thing, the camera Thomas had installed. He knew it was there, silently recording every interaction, every command, every unfair treatment. And though Donna didn't know about it, Caleb found a small sense of comfort in the idea that soon, his father would see the truth. It was the only thing keeping him going as Donna's cruelty continued to chip away at him day by day. Caleb tried to find small moments of peace amidst the chaos, but Donna always seemed to take them away. One afternoon, Caleb was outside, watering the garden like Donna had ordered. The sun was warm, and for a brief moment, he felt a flicker of calm. But just as he was starting to relax, Evan came bounding outside, a soccer ball in hand. "Hey, Caleb, want to play?" Evan's tone was mocking, and Caleb knew it wasn't a real invitation. He hesitated, glancing back toward the house, knowing Donna wouldn't allow it. Before Caleb could even answer, Donna's voice rang out from the kitchen window. "Caleb, stop messing around. There's still trash to take out," she barked. Evan smirked, clearly enjoying the power he held over Caleb, and kicked the ball around by himself, while Caleb was forced to head back inside and resume his chores. It was moments like these that made Caleb feel invisible, trapped in a cycle where every small joy was stolen away by the next demand. Evan's behavior only made things worse. He thrived on the attention from Donna and took pleasure in watching Caleb struggle under her constant orders. Whenever Donna wasn't looking, Evan would throw a smug glance in Caleb's direction, knowing that his position as the favored child was secure. "Too bad you're stuck doing all the boring stuff," Evan would tease, tossing his ball from hand to hand. Caleb kept his head down, but the bitterness inside him grew. He couldn't escape the feeling of being constantly overlooked, both by Donna and by his father. On weekends, when most kids were out playing or hanging out with friends, Caleb was stuck doing chores from dawn until dusk. Donna found new ways to keep him busy, whether it was cleaning the windows, scrubbing the floors, or running errands. And while Caleb worked, Evan had the freedom to do whatever he wanted. It was an endless cycle of work and humiliation, with no escape in sight. Caleb's frustration bubbled just beneath the surface, but he had no choice but to comply. Even when he finished his tasks, there was no reward, no relief. Donna always found something else for him to do, and Evan always found new ways to taunt him. "Better get used to it," Evan would say with a smirk. Caleb's only solace came from knowing the camera was watching, capturing everything. But even that comfort felt small in the face of the relentless pressure he faced every day. He just hoped that, eventually, his father would see what was really happening. One night, Caleb was lying in bed when he overheard a conversation that chilled him to the bone. From his room, he could hear Donna's voice, sharp and low, talking to Evan. "I wish Caleb wasn't here," she said bluntly, not realizing that her words carried through the thin walls. Caleb froze, his heart racing. He had always felt unwanted, but hearing Donna actually say it out loud confirmed what he had feared all along. The house wasn't just cold, it was hostile, and he didn't belong. The next morning, Caleb couldn't shake the weight of Donna's words. As he went about his usual chores, her voice echoed in his mind, making each task feel heavier. He moved through the house like a ghost, wondering if Evan and Donna noticed or even cared. They treated him the same as always, distant, demanding, and dismissive. But Caleb knew something had changed within him. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Something had to be done. Later that day, while Donna and Evan were out, Caleb remembered the camera Thomas had installed. It was the only thing that might help improve what he was going through. Nervously, Caleb replayed some of the footage. His hands shook as he watched scenes of Donna barking orders at him, Evan lounging on the couch while Caleb scrubbed floors, and the harsh way Donna treated him compared to her own son. It was all there, undeniable proof of the unfairness he'd been living through. As he scrolled through the recordings, one particular clip stood out. Donna was in the living room, telling Caleb to clean up after Evan, who sat with his feet propped up, watching TV. "You don't get to rest until everything is spotless," Donna had said, her voice cold and unfeeling. Caleb paused the video, his heart pounding. This was it, the evidence he needed. Now, he just had to figure out how to show it to Thomas without making everything worse. The realization hit Caleb hard, he couldn't keep quiet any longer. Donna's words, her actions, and the way she treated him had gone too far. With the camera footage as his backup, Caleb knew he had the power to reveal the truth to his father. But the thought of confronting Thomas made him feel small and scared. What if Thomas didn't believe him? What if things got even worse? Caleb knew there was no turning back now. The truth was out there, he just had to find the courage to use it. When Thomas returned from his trip, Caleb knew it was time to show him the footage. The tension in the house had been unbearable, and the only way to ease it was to reveal the truth. One evening, while Donna and Evan were out, Caleb nervously approached his father. "Dad, I need to talk to you," Caleb began, his voice trembling. Thomas turned toward him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "It's about Donna. I have something to show you." Caleb led his father to the computer, where he had queued up the videos from the hidden camera. As the footage played, Thomas sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the screen. The images told the story better than Caleb ever could, Donna treating Caleb like a servant, assigning him endless chores, and speaking to him with cold indifference. Thomas's face hardened as he watched Donna's sharp commands, while Evan lounged without a care. "You can't rest until the living room is spotless," Donna's voice rang through the speakers. Caleb watched his father's reaction closely, afraid of what might happen next. By the time the last clip finished, Thomas's hands were clenched into fists. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "I can't believe this," he muttered under his breath. His frustration was palpable, a mixture of anger at Donna and guilt for not seeing it sooner. Caleb felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. Thomas's silence hung heavy in the air, and Caleb wasn't sure what his father would do. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Thomas finally asked, his voice thick with regret. Before Caleb could answer, the door creaked open. Donna and Evan walked in, unaware of what had just transpired. Thomas turned to Donna, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tense. Donna glanced at Caleb, sensing that something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a hint of nervousness in her voice. Thomas didn't respond immediately, his eyes locked on her, a storm brewing behind them. Caleb stood frozen, the tension in the room almost unbearable. Donna attempted to defend herself as Thomas confronted her. "I was just teaching Caleb responsibility," she said, her voice wavering. "He needs to learn how to take care of things." But Thomas wasn't having it. "This isn't responsibility, Donna. This is abuse," he shot back, his voice firm. Donna's facade crumbled as she realized the gravity of the situation. Caleb watched in silence, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and fear. The confrontation had begun, and there was no turning back now. It was a quiet afternoon when Caleb accidentally overheard something that would change everything. Donna was in the living room, speaking on the phone in a hushed voice. Caleb, walking down the hallway, stopped when he heard his name. "Richard, I'm ready," Donna whispered, unaware that Caleb was listening. "As soon as Thomas leaves for his next trip, we'll transfer the money. Caleb and Thomas won't know what hit them." The words sent a jolt through Caleb's body. Richard. That was Evan's father, Donna's ex-husband. And now, they were planning something together, something dangerous. Caleb's heart raced as he tried to process what he had just heard. Donna wasn't just cruel, she was scheming. She was planning to steal from his father, to take everything while they were left in the dark. Caleb crouched by the hallway, struggling to breathe quietly as Donna continued her conversation, oblivious to his presence. "We'll disappear before they even realize what's happened," she said, her voice cold and calculated. Caleb felt sick. This wasn't just about him anymore. His father's entire life was at risk, and Caleb was the only one who knew. As soon as Donna hung up, Caleb rushed back to his room, his mind spinning. He couldn't believe what he had just overheard. His father had no idea what Donna was planning, and if Caleb didn't act fast, it could be too late. The weight of responsibility crashed down on him. He knew he had to do something, but what? Telling Thomas seemed like the obvious answer, but the fear of Donna finding out kept gnawing at him. Caleb had already seen how manipulative she could be. What if she turned this around on him? The panic in Caleb's chest grew as he realized how little time he had. Donna had made it clear that as soon as Thomas left for his next trip, she and Richard would put their plan into action. Caleb's thoughts raced. Should he try to stop them himself? Should he tell his father everything and hope he believed him? The uncertainty was overwhelming, and for the first time in his life, Caleb felt truly powerless. He had no idea how to protect his father from what was coming. That night, Caleb barely slept. The fear of what Donna was planning haunted him, and the idea of losing everything, his father, their home, left him feeling more alone than ever. He wanted to believe that there was still time to stop it, but as the hours ticked by, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. Donna had always been one step ahead, and now, it seemed like she was about to win. Caleb knew he had to make a choice, and fast. As the hours dragged on, Caleb's fear only grew. The thought of confronting his father felt impossible. What if Thomas was too late to stop them? Donna was dangerous, and Caleb knew that if he didn't act soon, everything they had could be gone. But the weight of the secret he was carrying felt too heavy. He was just a kid, how could he possibly take on something this big? The uncertainty gnawed at him, leaving him paralyzed with fear. He thought about going straight to his father in the morning, but the fear of Donna's retaliation held him back. What if she found a way to twist the truth, making it look like Caleb was lying? He had seen how easily she manipulated Thomas in the past. Caleb didn't know if his father would see through her lies this time. The risk of not being believed was terrifying, but the idea of doing nothing was even worse. Caleb felt like he was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. By the time the first light of morning crept through his window, Caleb had made a decision. He couldn't keep this to himself any longer. Even if it scared him, even if it meant facing Donna's wrath, he had to tell Thomas the truth. The stakes were too high, and there was too much to lose. Caleb took a deep breath, knowing that what he did next would change everything. He had to trust that his father would believe him, even if it meant exposing the dangerous game Donna was playing. With his heart pounding, Caleb prepared himself for the confrontation that lay ahead. He knew that once he revealed Donna's plan, there would be no turning back. But Caleb also knew that if he didn't act, Donna and Richard would take everything from them. It was time to stop being afraid. Caleb had to find the courage to protect his father, no matter the cost. That morning, Caleb woke with a sense of determination he hadn't felt before. As he got ready, his thoughts raced, replaying the conversation he had overheard and the plan Donna and Richard had in motion. He had to act quickly. Before Thomas left for his next trip, Caleb knew he had to tell him everything. As they sat at the breakfast table, Caleb could barely eat, his stomach twisting with anxiety. When Donna left the room to tend to something, Caleb seized the moment. "Dad, I need to talk to you," he whispered urgently, his voice trembling. Thomas glanced at him, concerned by the seriousness in Caleb's tone. "What's going on?" he asked, leaning in closer. Caleb took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "It's about Donna and Richard," Caleb began, carefully explaining everything he had overheard. He told Thomas about the plan to steal the money, about how they were going to disappear as soon as Thomas left for his trip. Thomas's face darkened with each word, the realization of Donna's betrayal hitting him hard. "Are you sure about this, Caleb?" Thomas asked, his voice strained. Caleb nodded, his hands shaking. "I heard it all, Dad. They're planning to take everything." Thomas sat in silence for a moment, processing the information. He had already seen the evidence of Donna's mistreatment, but this was something far worse. Thomas stood up abruptly, his face set with determination. "We can't let this happen," he said, his voice firm. "Thank you for telling me, Caleb. I'm going to take care of this before it's too late." Caleb felt a wave of relief wash over him, but the fear of what would come next still lingered. Thomas wasted no time. He contacted his lawyer and set up a plan to catch Donna and Richard in the act. They would monitor the bank accounts closely and install more cameras around the house. Caleb watched as his father transformed from someone who had been passive and distant into a man of action, determined to protect what was his. It gave Caleb a sense of hope, knowing that his father was finally stepping up to defend them both. But even with the plan in place, Caleb couldn't shake the worry that something might still go wrong. As Thomas prepared to confront Donna, Caleb braced himself for what was to come. He knew the next few days would be tense, filled with uncertainty. But for the first time in a long while, Caleb felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. His father believed him, and they were in this together. Now, all they had to do was wait for Donna and Richard to make their move. The game wasn't over yet, but Caleb was ready for whatever came next. The day of the plan's execution arrived, and Caleb could feel the tension in the air. Thomas had left for his trip, but only to make it seem like things were normal. In reality, he was just a short drive away, waiting for the right moment. Inside the house, Caleb moved through his chores, watching Donna and Evan closely. He could tell that something was different. Donna seemed on edge, glancing at the clock frequently. Finally, the moment came. Donna received a message on her phone, and within minutes, Richard was at the door. Caleb, hidden in his room, listened as Donna and Richard began their plan. They talked in low voices, and he could hear the clicking of a laptop as they accessed Thomas's bank accounts. His heart raced as he realized that this was it, the evidence they needed to catch them in the act. As they worked, completely unaware of the cameras recording their every move, Caleb quietly sent a message to Thomas. "They're doing it now," he texted, his fingers trembling. Within minutes, the front door swung open, and Thomas entered, followed by 2 police officers. "What the hell is going on here?" Thomas's voice was calm but filled with controlled anger. Donna and Richard froze, their faces draining of color as they realized they had been caught. "Thomas, this isn't what it looks like," Donna stammered, trying to close the laptop, but it was too late. The officers stepped forward, their expression serious, as they began to read Donna and Richard their rights. Caleb, watching from the hallway, felt a rush of relief. As the police escorted Donna and Richard out, Caleb stood next to his father, feeling the weight of the past months lift from his shoulders. Donna's final attempt to plead with Thomas fell on deaf ears. "You've done enough damage," Thomas said quietly, his voice filled with disappointment. Caleb could see the pain in his father's eyes, but also the resolve. This was the end of Donna's reign of cruelty, and for the first time, Caleb felt safe. The house, once a place of tension and fear, now felt calm, as if it could finally be a home. After everything had settled down, Thomas turned to Caleb, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing, son," he said, his voice steady. Caleb nodded, feeling a sense of pride and relief. The nightmare was over, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Caleb knew things were going to be okay. As they stood there in the quiet house, the weight of the past finally behind them, Caleb realized that they had both come out stronger on the other side. With Donna and Richard gone, the house felt different, lighter, almost peaceful. Evan, still reeling from the shock of his mother's arrest, was sent to live with relatives, leaving just Caleb and Thomas in the now quiet home. For the first time in a long while, there was no tension, no pressure to tiptoe around. Caleb could breathe easily again, knowing that the worst was behind him. Thomas, visibly shaken by everything that had happened, made a promise to Caleb that things would be different moving forward. In the weeks that followed, Thomas took steps to rebuild his relationship with Caleb. He arranged his trucking schedule to spend more time at home, and they slowly began to get to know each other. Caleb, still cautious, found himself warming up to his father in ways he hadn't expected. Thomas wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that effort meant the world to Caleb. The house, once a place of dread, began to feel like a home again, filled with quiet conversations, shared meals, and a sense of safety that Caleb hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, Thomas and Caleb sat together on the back porch, watching the sun set over the horizon. It was a simple moment, but it felt significant. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you," Thomas said quietly, breaking the silence. Caleb looked at his father, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "It's okay," Caleb replied, his voice steady. "We're here now." And for the first time, Caleb believed it. They had both been through so much, but they had come out stronger on the other side, ready to face whatever came next, together. Thomas made it clear that Caleb would always come first from now on. He rearranged his life, making more time for the son he had neglected for so long. Caleb noticed the change, the way his father was more present, more engaged. It was a slow process, but every day, they grew closer. Caleb knew that things would never be perfect, but for the first time, he felt hopeful about the future. They had both learned valuable lessons, about trust, about family, and about the importance of standing up for what was right. The sense of relief and freedom Caleb felt was overwhelming. He no longer had to live in fear, no longer had to shoulder the burden of Donna's cruelty. With her and Richard gone, he and Thomas could finally start fresh, free from the darkness that had clouded their lives for so long. As they sat on the porch together, watching the sky fade from pink to purple, Caleb knew that this was the beginning of something new. The future was uncertain, but they would face it as a family. Caleb and Thomas sat in a small, cozy diner on the edge of town, sharing a quiet meal. The air was filled with the comforting clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation from other tables. Caleb looked across at his father, who smiled at him over a cup of coffee. For the first time in a long while, the tension between them was gone, replaced by a warmth Caleb had only ever dreamed of. The weight of everything that had happened seemed to lift, and in its place was a sense of peace, a new beginning for both of them. As they finished their meal, Thomas reached across the table and gave Caleb's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "We're going to be okay, you know," he said, his voice soft but full of certainty. Caleb nodded, feeling the truth in his father's words. The chaos, the fear, and the pain were behind them now. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they would face it together. As they stepped out into the cool evening air, Caleb glanced up at the sky, feeling a quiet hope settle in his chest. For the first time in a long time, the future felt bright.